Hi guys, today we are going to be doing a summary of topic one, which is development dynamics. And we are going to start off with how we measure development. So what is development? Development is when a country progresses or improves economically and socially. And we use several indicators to give us an indication of how developed a country is. So whether it's well developed or not. And we obviously categorize those countries into what would be referred to as HICs, which are high income countries. We also have middle income countries and LICs, which are low income countries. Now, we use several indicators to measure development. And the first set of indicators are economic indicators of development. So, as the name suggests, economic indicators are those that measure the wealth of the country. Now, examples of economic indicators include GDP, which is the gross domestic product, and this is the total value of goods and services sold in a country in 1 year. Now that gives us an indication as to how much wealth or money is coming into that country in a year. Now GDP can also be, the GDP that comes in can be divided by the number of people that live in that country. And when we do that, we say that that is the GDP per capita. So per capita means per person. Then we have a second indicator that is an economic indicator, and that is the GNI. Now, the GNI is the gross national income, and that's calculated by taking the GDP and adding the income that is created by TNCs in that country minus the debt in that country. Then thirdly, we have the PPP, which is the purchasing power parity, and that refers to what money can buy you in a particular country. So it gives you an idea of how expensive or inexpensive goods are in a particular country. Then the last one we'll be talking about, an economic indicator, is the Gini coefficient. And this measures how wealth is distributed in a country. And that is done using a scale of 0 to 1. Now, the second set of indicators that we can use to measure how developed a country is are social indicators. And social indicators obviously have to do with people. These ones will measure the quality of life of people in a country. So how people live and how, their well-being. And examples here of social indicators include the literacy rates, which obviously literacy referring to the number of people that can read and write that are above the age of 15. We have life expectancy, so how long people can expect to live in a country. We have other things like water security, food security, and so on. Now, one of the main ones that are used under this category is the HDI, and that is the Human Development Index. And the Human Development Index measures the income in that country, the life expectancy in that country, and the literacy rates in the country. Now, some people say that this is the best measure of development because it involves or includes both social and human indicators, so income, literacy rates, and life expectancy. Then lastly, we have political indicators. Now, these have to do with systems of governance within a country and will include things like, freedom of speech and corruption. And under this, we have the Corruption Perceptions Index. And this index has been devised to help investors determine which countries would be best to invest in. So if a country is corrupt, then it will be considered as not a very good investment prospect. Because if investors take their money there, then their money would be in danger of either being wasted or, the investment not obviously being a good investment. In this next section, we are going to talk about development and population. Now, on this slide, we have two population pyramids. Sometimes they're also referred to as population structures, but I think that for our specification, the examiners would like us to use the term population pyramid. So the population pyramid of a country can help us determine whether that country is developed or not. In other words, it will give us an idea of whether that particular country is developed or not. Now, when talking about population in a country, there are certain terms that we need to know the meaning of. So the main terms here include birth rate, which is the number of live births per 1,000 in the population of a country per year. And then the death rate is the number of deaths per 1,000 people in a country per year. Then we also have the life expectancy, which is how long someone in a country can expect to live for. And this obviously gives us an indication as to how good the healthcare in a country is. If the quality of healthcare and the provision of it is good, then people can expect to live longer, and vice versa. Then we have infant mortality. Now, infant mortality is the number of children per 1,000 births that die before the age of 1. Now, that obviously will give you an indication as to the development level of a country. If the infant mortality is high, then it will mean obviously that the country is not as well developed because their medical care and infrastructure may not be as developed as well. Then we have fertility rates. These are the average number of births per woman. And then maternal mortality is the number of mothers per 100,000 who die in childbirth. Then we also have dependency ratio, which is the last key term we'll be talking about. And this refers to the number of people between the age of 0 to 14 and those that are over 65, the age of 65, compared to those who work. Now, what does that mean then? So it means that it's the number of people that rely on the economically active or the working population. So they are dependents. So 0 to 14 obviously are people who are not yet at the age where they can work. So they are likely to be of school-going age, for example, and they rely on their parents, so they're dependents. And then the ones who are over 65 are likely to be retired and therefore are considered to be dependent on the economically active, because the economically active will be paying taxes, and those taxes obviously are going to be going into the pension pots that will be supporting them. So the dependency ratios here, if high, can then mean that out of the GDP that is coming to the country and to the government, a lot of that money is going to the dependents, which is not necessarily a good thing. Now, coming back to the population pyramids that we have here. Now, the top population pyramid there is one for Malawi, and the one at the bottom is one for the United Kingdom. And we can obviously see some differences between the two, and those will obviously indicate to us whether a country is developed or not. If we look at the one for Malawi, it has a very wide base here at the bottom. Now that implies that Malawi has a high birth rate, and countries that have a high birth rate are likely to be countries that are not as well developed. So these are LICs, or low income countries, and high birth rates could imply that in the country people do not have access to contraception, for example, and that could indicate that that country is poor. If we compare that to the population pyramid for the UK, you can see that at the bottom of this particular population pyramid, the birth rate is a lot lower. Okay, and then going back to Malawi, if we look at the top of the population pyramid, it narrows down quite a bit. Okay, so that indicates to us that the life expectancy in Malawi is a lot lower than the life expectancy we have here for the UK. The UK decreases a lot more gradually, and not as fast. So meaning that the life expectancy in the UK is a lot higher. Now that indicates to us that the UK is likely to have better healthcare provision and better infrastructure in terms of healthcare, better more doctors per person and so on, and therefore it's a developed country, because for you to have good healthcare and healthcare provision, you'd have to be a country that is economically able to do so. You have the money to do so. Then finally, we can have a look at the steps that are between the different age groups here in Malawi. And we can see that some of them are very big steps, which indicates that the death rates are likely to be fairly high in Malawi. So from very high birth rates, and then the death rates, people, the large steps here are showing that a lot of people die as well. That obviously again is indicating that in terms of healthcare provision, Malawi may not have as good a healthcare provision as the UK, where that is not necessarily the case, because here in the UK it looks like the number of middle-aged people that we have here is a lot more than we do in Malawi. So these two population pyramids, if we were to find them in an exam, we should be able to distinguish which one is showing us a low-income country and which one is showing us a high-income country. This next slide here is also on population, and it shows us the demographic transition model. Now, this model here helps us explain how a country's population changes as it develops. Now, it has 4 stages in a country's, it shows 4 stages in a country's development. The first stage, obviously here, being the high stationary stage. Then you have the early expanding, and then late expanding, and finally you have the low stationary. Now, the theory suggests that each country will go through each of these stages here as it develops. So in stage 1, which is the high stationary, you can see here that the birth rates are fairly high. The birth rate obviously being shown by this line here. So the birth rates are high and the death rates are high as well. And as a result, the population growth, or the total population growth here shown by this other line here, is also fairly low. Then we have stage 2, which is early expanding. And at this particular stage, the birth rate remains really high as well. You can see that. But then the death rate begins to decline. Now, that may suggest to us, or that suggests to us, that this country is improving in terms of its medical provision, or healthcare provision rather, and as a result of that, the death rates begin to decline. And then we can see that the population growth, the total population growth, begins to go up fairly significantly, obviously, as the death rates decline. Then we're moving on to the third stage, which is a late expanding. The birth rates as well begin to fall, and at this point the death rates are also quite low, but the population, the total population, is still growing and growing fairly quickly. Now the suggestion here is that obviously now the country has got very good healthcare provision, and as a result of that, the death rates are low. As far as the birth rates are concerned, the country is likely now to have, better contraception or more contraception available to more people, meaning that the birth rates will go down. It can also be explained by the fact that this country is developed to the extent where a majority of the people in the country, are employed. And as a result of that, they are focusing a little more on their careers, meaning that they're going to have either later marriages, or they're likely to have children a lot later, and that then is explaining why the birth rates are on the decline as well. Now, the last stage is the low stationary, and here again we have low death rates, and the birth rate is fluctuating. But the population growth as well has become quite stable. So it's either growing or not growing, declining. So you have at this particular stage, you have countries where the population is growing, but only very slowly, and some countries which may experience negative population growth, where the death rates are a little higher than the birth rates. This next slide shows global wealth inequality. Now, there's a huge development gap or wealth inequality between the countries of the world. Now, this Brand report of 1980 that we'll be talking about divided the countries of the world into the global north, which constitutes HICs, or rich countries. And you can see that on this map here on the right, those countries are shown using the yellow color. Then we also have the global south, which consists of countries in places like Africa and South America, which are shown in the orange color and are referred to as the poor south. Now, obviously, locationally, those countries that are LICs are in the southern hemisphere, and the global north is in the northern hemisphere and consists of the rich countries. And this divide here is known as the north-south divide. Now, we can also see from the map that there's one country that does not quite fit into this category locationally. So it's an anomaly here, because locationally Australia is in the southern hemisphere, but is considered to be a wealthy country. And so you can see that the line goes all the way this way, dividing the countries, into the northern and southern hemisphere. But when it comes to Australia, it then picks up Australia here at the bottom and puts it in the northern category. So locationally, Australia is in the south, but is considered to be in the global north. Now, when it comes to the global share of wealth, that share of wealth obviously is not equal, and there's global inequality in the distribution of wealth and the share of wealth across the world, and that is shown to the right here in the quintiles. So we have the richest 20% of countries in the world at the top here, and those countries own 82.8% of the world's wealth. Now, that is quite significant, because obviously it shows that the richest fifth of countries in the world own majority of the wealth, so 82.8%. Then the bottom 20% of countries only own 1% of the global wealth. Now, that clearly is a very big difference between the poorest and the richest. 1% of the world's wealth, almost brings to question as to how those countries are able to survive, with only that 1% of the world's wealth. Then we have the bottom 40% of countries owning only 3.1% of the global wealth. Now, that's almost obviously half of the countries in the world owning only 3.1%. Now, that obviously is a clear indicator as to how wealth is not equally distributed, or there are great inequalities in wealth distribution across the world. Nowadays, however, we have what are referred to as emerging economies. Now, these have come onto the scene and have changed the dynamic, this particular dynamic here that was suggested by the Brand report in 1980. And those countries have been rapidly, industrializing and obviously growing economically and wealth-wise. And examples of those newly industrialized countries include Brazil, Chile, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Malaysia. So those are now countries that have changed the way we look at global wealth distribution. Although having said that, it's still not, there's still a lot of global inequality. So what are the factors that have hindered development in LICs? So low-income countries face several challenges in their development process, and we are going to talk through these challenges one at a time. Now, the first challenge here is landlocked countries. Now, being landlocked means that you don't have access to the sea. So you're surrounded by, by other countries or just by land. Now, that means then you don't have, access to trade in terms of ships coming in for export and import of goods and of goods, and that can hinder development. And the example that our specification gives here is Malawi, which is a landlocked country. And Malawi has been one of those countries that have struggled with economic development. Now, the second barrier to development is colonialism. Now, this obviously is in a historical context, and countries that were colonized previously were set back, because when a country is colonized, it's taken over by a different country, which then means that they don't have access to their resources, and those resources are likely to be taken from them when they are, a colony, and that can hinder development or has hindered development. Then the next one, the next barrier to development is neocolonialism. Now, this is normally linked to transnational corporations or TNCs. And in a lot of the poorer countries, the LICs, TNCs still control and own the plantations that were set up during colonial times. And these plantations do not give the people who work in them a fair compensation in terms of wages and income. And therefore, the people that work in, those plantations are exploited by the TNCs and are obviously not getting fair remuneration or pay. That means that in terms of economic development, the country will struggle because its citizens are not paid, fairly. Then the fourth one that we'll be talking about is terms of trade. And this refers to the value of a country's exports relative to its imports. So poor countries like Malawi will export a lot less than they import. So it means that they are selling a lot less than they are buying. And if that is what is happening, then the country ends up with a deficit, and a deficit then leads to debt because they will need to borrow money to be able to keep the country running. The next barrier to development is rural isolation. Now, in a lot of countries that are LICs, a lot of the population is a rural population, or a lot of the people in that country live in rural areas, which is obviously the countryside areas. Now, those countryside areas tend to be quite remote and isolated. And they have poor accessibility in terms of transport networks and connectivity, obviously, as well, and that can hinder development because transporting goods in and out of those areas is going to be quite difficult. So it's difficult for them to to trade and so forth. Now, the next barrier to development we'll mention here is climate change. Now, a lot of those poor countries, again, LICs, rely on agriculture for their survival. Some of them do it either, for subsistence, so for their food, for themselves and for their families. And some of them also rely on agriculture to be able to to get an income. So they grow crops and then they sell those crops. But when they're impacted then by climate change, which means that there may not be as much rain due to desertification, then it means that their source of livelihood is impacted because their crops, they tend to experience crop failure, which then means that they will not have a steady or reliable income. Then lastly, we have increased pollution. Now, a lot of LICs are actually experiencing rapid urbanization, and that rapid urbanization is caused by rural to urban migration. And that rural to urban migration is caused by mechanization, which has now been happening in the rural areas where you have a lot more machinery being used in those rural areas, and people becoming unemployed as a result of that. So those people in those rural areas then choose to move to urban areas to try and to try and get a better life. So they are seeking better opportunities in those urban areas. And when they move, obviously those urban areas begin to grow fairly quickly, which is where we are talking about rapid urbanization. And that rapid urbanization has presented several problems such as water and air pollution, which are big challenges in those urban areas. And these also, again, can hinder development in those LICs. In this section, we will be looking at development theories. Now, in development dynamics, there are two main theories that we need to know about. And the first one is Rostow's theory, which is shown to the right over here. Now, Rostow believed that countries should pass through 5 stages of development. Now we can see that the first stage of development is the traditional society. During this stage, a country has a subsistence economy. Now, subsistence economy here refers to an economy that relies on farming, and it's where people in the country farm just enough for their own food, and they do not have a surplus that they can sell for, to get money. Then moving on to the second stage, which is the pre-takeoff stage, a country then begins to shift from farming to manufacturing. Now, because they have done that, it means that they are now, processing raw materials into manufactured goods, and this leads to trade because they will then sell those manufactured goods for profit. And as far as farming is concerned, they begin to grow cash crops, and they then sell or trade those cash crops for money. Then we have stage 3, which where a country experiences rapid growth. Now that growth is precipitated or caused by technology, and that technology creates new manufacturing industries, which then begin to sell goods overseas. So because now the trade has moved from just being a local trade to international trade, then the country is making a lot more money. Then we have stage 4, which is the drive to maturity. Technology use during this stage continues to go up, and that continues to drive the economy even further, and consumer goods continue to be manufactured, and the sale of them obviously continues to generate a lot of wealth for that particular country. Then we have the 5th and last stage, which is the stage of high mass consumption. Now, at this stage, the country has a wide range of goods to choose from, and for the population of that country to buy. And during this stage, the country is fairly wealthy, and that is where we are talking about a period of affluence, and people can afford to buy goods and services at high prices, and the population of that particular country has a good quality of life. Then the next theory that we'll be looking at is Frank's dependency theory. That is shown here to the bottom right. And this theory here divides the country into 2 regions. so two global regions. And the first region here is the core region. And then we also have the periphery. Now, what's happening here is that the rich countries, which are the core, buy their resources, which are mostly in the form of raw materials, from the periphery, so the poor countries. They then manufacture those products or those raw materials that they bought at a very minimal fee or price from the poor countries, and then sell them back to the periphery for very high profit. Now, because they do that, they are actually exploiting the periphery, because the periphery is selling those raw materials at a very low cost. But then once they are manufactured, they are buying them back at a very high cost. So his theory suggests that the core exploits the periphery. In this next section, we will be looking at globalization and how it has helped countries develop. Now, globalization is the way in which countries have become increasingly interconnected. There are several reasons for this happening, and one of those reasons is improvements in technology. Now, those improvements in technology have led to faster communication, movement of people, goods, and cultures. Then a second reason for the increasing interconnectedness between countries is interdependence. And that is the fact that no country is self-sufficient, and countries have to rely on each other through trade for the goods and for the services that they do not produce in their own country. Then lastly, the interconnectedness between countries has increased because of investment. And that investment is in the form of FDI, or what is referred to as foreign direct investment. And this has been mostly due to the action of TNCs. So transnational corporations are those big companies that operate in more than one country in the world. An example being, say, Apple. Other examples being KFC, McDonald's, Adidas, and so on. So these big companies normally invest in other countries, and that has been mostly as a result of outsourcing labor, or finding countries where the labor cost is lower and manufacturing or setting up manufacturing plants in those countries. So that is a form of investment, and that investment obviously has led to a more globalized world. So this changing employment landscape as a result of TNC investment and globalization has then led to changes in the employment structures of countries. Now, the Clark-Fisher model here on the right suggests that countries go through stages in their employment structure as they develop. So there is the pre-industrial stage here, which is the first stage. Then there's an industrial stage, and then there's a post-industrial stage. Now, if we look at this particular diagram here, it shows that during the pre-industrial stage, the primary sector, most people rather, work in the primary sector, which is shown here by the green line. And 70% of people at this point here, for example, are working in the primary sector of industry. Now, the primary sector being, the sector where people, get raw materials from the land or the sea. So farming, fishing, and so on are the industries that people work in. Now, during the pre-industrial stage, the manufacturing or the secondary sector of industry is fairly low at just above 20%. And then the tertiary sector, which is the service sector, is also quite low, is the lowest actually, at under 10%. Then during the industrial sector, obviously that would be in a lot of people's eyes, the Industrial Revolution. And during that time, there's an increase in manufacturing. So we can see that the secondary sector begins to increase as manufacturing takes off. But at this stage, the primary sector is on a sharp decline. Uh, and then again, we also have an increasing tertiary sector. But the sector that is taking preeminence here, or that is at its highest, or is the highest sector that people work in, is the manufacturing sector due to the increase in the number of industries. Then the last stage is the post-industrial stage. And during this stage, the largest sector now is the tertiary or the service sector. And at this time, the primary sector continues to decline, and the secondary sector is, or the manufacturing sector is declining as well. Now, the secondary sector here going down may be, can be explained by a shift in where the manufacturing is taking place. So we know that a global shift has been taking place in the richer countries, and that has meant that manufacturing is no longer being done in those rich countries, but is being outsourced to the emerging economies. So that explains that decline in the secondary or manufacturing sector of industry. So again, just to recap, there are three stages in the employment structure of a country as it develops. So there's a pre-industrial stage, industrial stage, and the post-industrial stage. In this section, we will be talking about the importance of India on the world stage. Now, as we know, India has a rapidly growing economy and population, and is set to be the world's second largest economy by GDP by the year 2050. So why is it significant then? There are several reasons. And the first reason is India's geographical location. Now, India has international borders with 6 countries, and this gives it an advantage because it trades with several of its neighbors. It also benefits from being located between the world's fastest growing economic regions. And those regions are the Middle East and Southeast Asia. So they are able to trade within those particular regions and make a significant amount of wealth from doing that. Furthermore, India also has a large coastline, which allows it to trade with other parts of the world, including Europe and Africa. So the second reason why India is important on the world stage is its large population. It has a population of over 1.4 billion people, and this large population provides a labor force and global market. So if you are a TNC and you want to open a factory in a country where you can get cheap labor, India would be a very good proposition, because that large population means that you can get a cheap labor force, and you can also get a market for the product that you are manufacturing. So that makes it a very important country on the world stage. The third reason for India's importance on the world stage is its political influence. So India is a founding member of the UN and the G20 industrial nations. It takes part in peacekeeping missions and contributes the second largest number of troops to the UN, making it a very influential country politically. Then social significance of India is another reason why it's important on the world stage. Now, India has over 60 million people living in slums. Now, this is as a result of very rapid urbanization due to rural-urban migration. Now, the challenges that this causes, are significant, and that makes India a country that is, important to study on the world stage. In line with its social significance as well, India has a lot of people working outside the country. So people born in India that work outside the country. And that is referred to as the Indian diaspora, with over 35 million people that live in over 100 countries. Now, culturally, India is also quite significant. there are several languages that are spoken in India. In fact, there are over 1,500 languages that are spoken in the country. It has four major religions, which have actually spread to other parts of the world. And it has amongst some of the world's most ancient civilizations. Now, culturally as well, we can we can argue that Bollywood has a big influence across the world. It's the world's largest film industry, and is impacting on different parts of the world as they produce their movies and show them on social media and also on mainstream media. Then environmentally, India has got a very huge significance on the world stage. Now, it is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases, and this is because it has been rapidly industrializing and therefore is contributing a lot of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which then has got significance in terms of global warming and the enhanced greenhouse gas effect. In this next section, we are going to be looking at the factors that have led to economic development in India. Now, there are several factors that have helped India develop fairly rapidly, and one of them is economic liberalization. So the government of India has created a free market, and a free market means that trade is governed by the laws of supply and demand, and not necessarily by the government. So the government has stepped back and has allowed consumers and companies to be the ones that are leading the laws of supply and demand. And obviously this has created a free environment, which means that TNCs can now come in and set up in the country. And when TNCs such as Apple or say Coca-Cola or BT go and set up in India, this brings FDI or foreign direct investment, and that brings money into the country. And as we said earlier, development has to do with a country making progress, both economically and socially. So if there's money coming in, it means that India is developing economically. Now, the second reason why, or the second factor that has led to economic development in India is education. Now, the Indian government provides free education to 6 to 14-year-olds. Now, this has been very important in improving development in the country because it means that literacy rates in the country have improved. And when the students or the children have higher literacy rates, it means that when they leave school, they can have access to better, well-paying jobs, which then brings more money to the country through taxation. And that money that comes through taxation can then be used for investment into infrastructure, which then leads to the multiplier effect. The third factor that has led to economic development in India is infrastructure. So the Indian government has improved the rail and road transport in the country. So they have actually really invested in their roads and their railway lines. And the roads have actually doubled from 3 to 6 million kilometers of road in the country. Now that improves the movement of goods and people within the country and encourages a lot more trade. Furthermore, there are 34 international airports in India and 103 domestic airports. Again, this is a factor that will facilitate trade and therefore lead to more economic development. The last factor is aid. Now, aid obviously is help or in the form of money or personnel that is given by other countries. And in the past, India received a lot of aid from other countries. This was obviously invested into the economy to help bring about the multiplier effect. However, aid in the recent past has reduced in India, but it still did help India in the past to make a lot of economic strides. In this section, we'll look at the impacts of change in India are mostly brought about by economic development. So we've categorized those changes into social change, or those impacts rather, into social change and economic change. And the first social change we will look at here is rapid urbanization. So urbanization is an increase in the proportion of people who live in towns and cities compared to those who live in rural areas. Now, the number of people in India living in towns and cities has increased, and this has been due to rural to urban migration as people move from rural areas to try and find better prospects in urban areas. The second social change that has taken place is later marriages. So this is due to a more educated public in India, and as more and more people are better educated in India, they will pursue a career, and as a result, they will prefer to get married later as they pursue that career first. Then the next change, social change that has taken place has been to India's population structure. Now, earlier on in this topic, we talked about population pyramids, and the population pyramid of India has changed as a result of its economic development. And one of the changes to the population pyramid of India has been due to the lower birth rates. Now, these lower birth rates are due to the later marriages that we talked about a little earlier. Then there has also been a lower dependency ratio in the population structure of India. Then thirdly, there are lower infant mortality rates in India. So there are the number of children that die before the age of 1 has reduced in India, and this obviously can be attributed to better healthcare provision as well as a better water supply. The last social change that we will discuss here is the dilution of the traditional culture and customs of people in India. Now, as more and more people move to towns and cities due to rapid urbanization, there has been more social integration. Now, as we discussed earlier, India's population is divided into social classes. But as people move into urban areas, people marry outside their social classes, and this obviously changes the way the culture and customs of India are structured. So in terms of economic changes, the main thing that we're going to be discussing here is that change in India has led to economic inequality. Now that means that we have, on one hand, a growing middle class in India, and that middle class has high-paying jobs, and as a result, they have a good quality of life. Now, the people who fall under this category of the growing middle class include people who work in IT, and people who are managers in various organizations, and university lecturers. And on the other hand, we have the unskilled workers. Now, these are people who work in sweatshops owned by TNCs, or people who hold employment in the cottage industry, cottage industries in India. So cottage industries are those industries that are operated mostly from home and include people who are mostly self-employed. So what we are saying is that the main economic change is that there has been a wealth gap or economic disparity or inequality in the country. In this section, we are going to look at unequal development in India. So India's rapid urbanization has led to wealth being concentrated in urban areas where most of the economic activity is taking place. And this has led to huge contrasts between urban and rural areas, with the wealthy areas being referred to as the urban cores and the rural areas being referred to as the rural periphery. Now, the two contrasting areas that we'll be discussing today, as you can see on the map, are Maharashtra, which is the urban core, and Bihar, which is the rural periphery. So starting with Maharashtra then, it's India's richest core region, and it has the highest GDP in India. So GDP, we said, is the gross domestic product, which is the total value of goods and services that are generated in an area. So this is the area that generates the most wealth for India. Now, Mumbai, which is the largest city in India, is located in this region. And it's actually, according to our specification, one of the main case studies that we are going to be looking at later on. Now, Maharashtra has a large service industry, and the services here that are provided include banking, IT, and call centers. There's also a large manufacturing sector in the core, which means that they are also generating a lot of money from factories in this core region. It also has the largest port in the country, which means that trade can take place between India and other countries within this particular region. There's also a large construction industry. And as you can imagine, because of rural to urban migration to this area, it means that housing is required, and that obviously then leads to that large construction industry. And Mumbai is also home to Bollywood, which is the world's largest film industry. And that is again located in this Maharashtra region of India. Now, if we contrast that then to Bihar, which is the rural periphery, this here is India's poorest state. 86% of its population is rural, and those people who live in these rural areas normally normally have a subsistence lifestyle, which is where they grow enough food for themselves and their family. So they don't sell anything to anybody else, and therefore remain fairly poor. Now, the literacy rates in Bihar as well are fairly low, and they are at 47%. So almost half of the people that live in Bihar cannot read or write. Now, that obviously has serious implications in terms of them finding employment and being able to support themselves. The society in Bihar as well is very caste-based. Now, as we discussed earlier, the caste system or the caste system in urban areas is beginning to get eroded because people are marrying outside their social class in most of the urban areas. But because Bihar is a rural periphery area, it's very social class based. Then lastly, the last feature rather of Bihar is that there is very little investment from the government in Bihar and from TNCs as well. So because of that, economic development there is very limited. In this next section, we will look at the features of top-down and bottom-up development strategies. India has employed both top-down and bottom-up development strategies to tackle its challenges and promote development in the country. So the table below shows the features of both types of strategy. We'll start off with the top-down strategies. And these are development strategies that are usually very expensive, and they involve the action of IGOs, TNCs, and other large organizations such as the World Bank and the IMF. IGOs here means intergovernmental organizations, and IMF stands for the International Monetary Fund. So because it costs a lot of money, they will need such large organizations to fund them. So what are the advantages of top-down development strategies? They can help a large number of people, and they also create jobs which can then trigger the multiplier effect. What are these disadvantages? They are very expensive, and if you borrow money to fund these projects, you're likely to end up in debt as a country. Then also another disadvantage is that local people are not normally consulted with regards to the decisions that are made about these development strategies. So the government on its own decides what it wants to do and goes ahead whether the people agree or not. So that's a disadvantage. Then for the bottom up strategies, these are mainly run by NGOs such as charities and universities. And these non-governmental organizations work with the local communities to identify what those local communities need, and then they help them to tackle those needs. So what are the advantages then? The good thing about bottom-up strategies is that they work in consultation with local people. So they actually identify what the local people need and then work together with those local people to meet their needs. And then a second advantage is that they use intermediate technology, which is cheap and easy to repair. So this is not very high-tech technology. It's technology that can actually be created and implemented within those local communities. So it's cheap for them and easy to use and to repair. The disadvantage with bottom-up strategies is that they only benefit a small number of people compared to the top-down strategies. In this section, we are going to be looking at a case study example of a top-down project in India. And that top-down project is the Sardar Sarovar Dam. So why was this dam needed? Now, India has got two seasons in terms of rainfall. They have a dry season, which is between November and March, and then they have the monsoon season, which is where they get very heavy rainfall between May and September. Now that means that if they do not manage their water effectively, then they will really have severe water shortages during the dry season. So during the wet season, this dam can be used to store water for the wet season. Now the dam was needed obviously because India has a large population which is continuing to grow, and people need the water for their domestic use. The water is also needed for electricity to produce hydroelectric power, which can then power the industries in the rapidly growing cities. So what were the benefits of this project? So the dam provides 3.5 liters of drinking water. It also provides hydroelectric power for cities and industries, and this has boosted economic growth within the country. It also provides water for irrigation. So irrigation is the artificial watering of crops. And this dam has been able to cover 1.8 million hectares of farmland in terms of irrigation. What are the disadvantages though? So this dam has led to flooding in India. 234 villages have been submerged, and the people who lived in these villages were forced out. Now, that flooding as well destroyed crops in the process, and that obviously leads to food insecurity in the country. The flooding also implies that there are poor soils for farming, because what has happened is the silt that used to flood the farmland is no longer being deposited on the farmland. Now that silt is rich in nutrients and makes the soil fertile. But now that the dam controls the amount of water that was flowing onto the farmland, this has created infertile soils, which are not necessarily that good for farming. Then the last disadvantage of the dam is that the weight of the dam can trigger earthquakes, which, as we know, can sometimes be common in India. The bottom-up case study project that we'll look at is the Astra Biogas Project. So Astra stands for the application of science and technology in rural areas. It's a project that is implemented by Bangalore University, and they work with the local communities to provide electricity for lighting and cooking. So why was the project needed? Now, in rural areas, daily chores such as collecting firewood for cooking take up a lot of time, especially for the women and the girls. And then the increasing population in these rural areas means that the wood supply is getting depleted fairly quickly as well. Now that leads to deforestation, which is not good for the environment. The third reason why it was needed is that people were getting unwell or sick from lung infections due to smoke produced by firewood in kitchens. So what was the solution then? So this project here aims to use cow dung to produce gas for cooking and for lighting. So the cow dung is put into a concrete pit where it ferments over time, and after it ferments, it produces methane. The methane is then pumped into people's homes and is used for cooking purposes and for lighting as well. Now, India at the moment has over 5 million biogas plants. What have been the benefits then? So women now have more time to work and produce an income for the family, and the girls also have more time in school. So this has obviously improved literacy rates in the rural areas, and this is beneficial to them because they can then get a good job after that and be able to bring an income for the family as well. The lung infections have reduced as well. Cooking is faster, and there's also less cleaning because there's less ash that is left over as a residue by the firewood. Then the sludge from the dung pits as well can be used as a fertilizer to improve crop yields. So the crops that they grow have seen an improvement as a result of this sludge from the dung pits. Then lastly, the electricity produced is used for lighting at night and pumping water for drinking and for irrigation. So overall, the project has been fairly beneficial for people who live in rural communities in India. So that brings us to the end of this section, this first topic, which is development dynamics. Okay.